I'm Priscilla Barrera with the Investing News Network, and here with me today is Joe Lowry, President of Global Lithium. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're here at the first Cathodes conference. What have been the main takeaways for you?
I've been going to battery-related conferences for over 20 years, and I would say this event kind of filled a gap in that it kind of got the middle level between raw material and battery people, cathode being a critical element, bringing disparate parts of that supply chain together so they can share information was a great idea. Benchmark did a fantastic job of organizing this, put together a great group of people, and I would rate this as one of the top events of this type that I've ever attended.
So you've recently published an article about what you define as the Star Alliance of the lithium market. Can you briefly share what your analogy is all about?
I used the airline alliances because I thought that was a ubiquitous concept that people could grasp easily. So there's no magic in calling it the Star Alliance, but it's readily understandable for most people, especially anybody who gets on an airplane these days. The real concept is that in the lithium space, you've seen in the last 12 to 18 months, really starting off, let's go back to March of 16 when SQM did the deal with LAC for the development of Caucharí, and that deal was kind of a seminal event. Then you saw LAC needed to get financing to do their half of the capital. Ganfeng came in and made the investment that they made in LAC, and then you saw SQM go out further and make a hard rock investment in Kidman Resources. Then we saw Ganfeng go back and do a deal with Pilbara. So it lined up nicely that you had kind of a loose affiliation of companies where they have common interests. And, everyone's not connected the same way, just like the bigger airlines tend to dominate the airline alliances. So I like that analogy. I think you're going to see those companies prosper because of their interrelationships. So that's why I went with that idea.
And have companies in the lithium market always had this approach, or is this something you've started to see this past year?
Well, the three big lithium, the traditional way of looking at the market was the big three, and that was FMC, Albemarle, and SQM. They tended to each have their own strengths and weaknesses, and oftentimes they would either buy or sell product. There were tolling agreements between the two to fill gaps in their own production profiles, and so I don't view that as the same as the alliance I'm talking about between the companies now, because it was still very much arm's length competitive. A lot of lawyers involved when you did a deal between the two. So I see the alliance now as quite different than the historical alliances or historical inner workings between lithium players.
All right. And do you think this alliance will help supply the market as demand for lithium increases in the next few years?
I think that what's happened, the transactions that were part of what I called the Star Alliance were the key enabler of capacity to expand, to even have a chance of meeting the increased demand. You have the fact Caucharí now is being developed. You have Kidman will come online, in my mind, much faster than they otherwise would have. In Pilbara, the investment Ganfeng made, they were fully funded shortly thereafter, because I think the market took a different look at them after Ganfeng was willing to do an offtake deal. So I think that absent the alliances, the shortage would be much more severe going forward. And, we still may have a shortage until 2022, 2023, but without the funding by the majors to the juniors, it would be much worse.
All right. And does any other junior company have any chance of joining that alliance?
That really isn't for me to say. I would hope so. I would hope that you'll continue to see the better funded, stronger lithium companies making strategic investments in juniors with good assets. So, yeah, I think that one or two other juniors, whether it's a bolt on to what I call the Star Alliance, or whether it's another alliance that forms. Maybe a company like Galaxy does a deal that we're not really seeing as obvious right now. I mean, there really aren't that many players out there, but Galaxy's got really good assets, and they're kind of the strongest of the next tier, and perhaps we'll see some activity there.
And that alliance leaves out Albemarle, another top producer. What's your opinion on that company? Do you think they have a chance against this Star Alliance with their long-term contracts approach at some point in the future?
Well, whether you agree or disagree with the long-term contracts approach, I mean, I think that's a strategy that they've decided to go with, and you can't really argue with the performance of the stock. You have to look at what Albemarle's done and say, hey, they picked a strategy. And whether you like it or not, everyone who can produce at a reasonable cost in the next 5 to 7, maybe 10 years is a winner. Albemarle certainly has great assets, and it wouldn't be my preferred strategy, the long-term contracts, because I think you don't necessarily want to go long in a tight market. But hey, I can disagree with them respectfully in this case, and just say, I wish them well.
And what about Tianqi? Will it be beneficial for them to form a similar Star Alliance with Albemarle? Is it possible?
I think that Tianqi, historic behavior is more of a, they obviously have the joint venture with Albemarle, but I don't think they're out looking to do the kind of deals that Ganfeng. Ganfeng's always had, of the two Chinese big producers, Ganfeng's always been the outward-looking one, having to do deals, having to dealt with all the big three, made other junior deals. That's not been Tianqi's style. I think Tianqi will continue to be, they're sharing the asset in the joint venture for Taliesin, but I think that's probably the extent of their alliance behavior.
And you've commented about FMC before. Will they be able to get back to the top 4 level?
I think that one of the great surprises of the last decade has been the kind of the fall of FMC from the top 3 now to number 6 in terms of LCE production. FMC's recast their business as an ag chem company, but they have a great asset, and that asset can be expanded. And I think when they do a spinoff, I think the new entity will expand. But I think it's premature to say they can get back into the top 4, because if you look at the size of Tianqi now, the size of Ganfeng, and Albemarle and SQM, FMC is so much smaller now. They would have to more than double Hombre Muerto. They would have to do other things to get to the kind of level that the current top 4 are at. So I think they've got a good business, but I think they remain in the second tier.
And many analysts have said that there's a lack of investment in the market. Do you think this could actually stop the electric car revolution?
I don't believe it'll stop it. I do think it has the potential to delay it or slow it down. My EV penetration numbers are on the low end. I have around 5% in 2025, and some people are talking double figures. I believe if you say that EV penetration in 2025 is going to be more than 10%, and you have a reasonable size battery in those cars, if you're assuming they're EVs and not just hybrids, or if they're pure EVs or PHEVs, I don't think there's enough lithium to do double figures. I don't think because the investment's been delayed so long, I don't believe enough lithium can be brought to market by 2025 to do more than 10% EV penetration. Now, a lot of people disagree with me, and that's fine. But if you're talking about the market now around 200,000 metric tons, if you're going to go to 800,000, and we saw that number at this conference by some people, my number's a little lower than that. That's 600,000 tons of new capacity, and in my calculations, we need a little over $6 billion. If you go to that next level, you're talking about $8 billion or more, but that money has to be invested in the next 3 years. And I don't see that happening.
Right. And finally, today, in terms of prices for the rest of the year, does your prediction for carbonate and hydroxide remain the same?
Well, yeah, I said the new normal for carbonate is 12 to 14, and I think those are good numbers. And and this is outside of China. China, I've always characterized as being different for a number of reasons. Plus, when people talk about the price in China, some people keep the VAT in, and some people separate the VAT. So outside of China, 12 to 14 is still good. 18 to 22, probably more for the rest of the year, towards the lower end of that range, but still in that band. And going forward, I see a gradual convergence of the prices, just because most of the capacity adds for hydroxide now are based on the hard rock process, which has similar cost structures for carbonate and hydroxide.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.